On June 4, 2008, Travis Alexander, a salesman, was killed at his home in Mesa, Arizona. His murder and the subsequent criminal trial have received widespread media attention. Alexander's injuries consisted of multiple stab wounds, a slit throat, and a shot to the head. The medical examiner ruled his death a homicide. Jodi Arias, Alexander's ex-girlfriend, was charged with his murder, and her trial began on January 2, 2013. Arias testified that she killed Alexander in self-defense. She was found guilty of first-degree murder on May 8, 2013. The case gained significant attention from the news media and was considered by many to be an example of both a trial by media and a media circus. Travis Victor Alexander was born in Riverside, California, on July 28, 1977. After his father's death, Alexander and his siblings were taken in by their paternal grandmother, who eventually introduced them to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Alexander was a salesman for the multi-level marketing company Prepaid Legal Services. He also worked as a motivational speaker. Jodi Arias was born in Salinas, California, on July 9, 1980. She and Alexander met in September 2006 at a Prepaid Legal Services conference in Las Vegas, Nevada. On November 26, 2006, Alexander baptized Arias into the Latter-day Saint faith. As of February 2, 2007, Alexander and Arias were a couple. After the two broke up on June 29, 2007, Arias moved to Mesa, Arizona, until April 2008, when she moved to her grandparents' house in Eureka, California. Alexander's body was discovered in a shower at his home. His throat had been cut and he had been shot in the head and stabbed multiple times. There have been conflicting reports over the number of stab wounds, with some reports stating 29, many stating 27, and after the verdict, more than 20. Maricopa County Medical Examiner Dr. Kevin Horn testified that Alexander's jugular vein, common carotid artery, and windpipe had been slashed. Alexander's hands also had defensive wounds. Horn further testified that Alexander may have been dead at the time the gunshot was inflicted. Alexander's death was ruled a homicide. Alexander had scheduled a trip to Cancun, Mexico. He had also missed an important conference call on the night of June 4, 2008, at 7 p.m. On June 9th, having been unable to reach Alexander, people from Prepaid Legal Services went to his home to check on him. His roommates said he was out of town. After some searching, they found a key to Alexander's main bedroom. When they entered it, they noticed large pools of blood in the hallway leading to the main bathroom, where his body was discovered in the shower. The 9.1.1 call they made notifying authorities of the discovery mentioned an ex-girlfriend, Arias, who Alexander said was stalking him, hacking into his Facebook account, and slashing tires. On May 28, 2008, a burglary occurred at the residence of Arias' grandparents, with whom she was living in Eureka, California. A .25 caliber gun and other objects were taken. The grandparents' gun was never recovered. The prosecutor argued that Arias staged the burglary and the stolen gun was used to shoot Alexander. Several days before the trip, Arias repeatedly contacted her ex-boyfriend, Daryl Brewer, asking to borrow 2 5-gallon gas cans for a trip to Arizona. The cans were not returned to Brewer. Receipts presented at trial also showed that Arias had purchased a third 5-gallon gas can, sunblock, and facial cleanser from Walmart in Salinas, California, on June 3, 2008. That evening, at an Arco gas station in Pasadena, California, she purchased 8.301 gallons of gasoline with her debit MasterCard and 9.59 gallons of gas with cash 4 minutes later. The MasterCard was used again on June 6, 2008, 3 times at a Tesoro gas station in Salt Lake City, a Pilot Flying J travel center in Winnemucca, Nevada, and a 7-Eleven in Sparks, Nevada. After Alexander's death, but before his body was discovered, Arias had continued to call him and had left him several voicemail messages. It was later alleged that she had accessed Alexander's voicemail messages after his death. She said that Alexander had initially planned to visit her in May 2008, but had changed his plans. On June 2, 2008, Arias rented a white Ford Focus in Redding, California, about 100 miles south of her residence. She told the budget rent-a-car staff that she would only be driving the car locally, but when the car was returned on June 7th, it had been driven about 2,800 miles. It was also missing all its floor mats, and there were what looked like Kool-Aid stains on the front and rear seats. The car was cleaned before police were able to examine it. A spent .25 caliber round was located near one of the sinks in the master bath. Alexander's damaged digital camera was located in the downstairs washing machine. The camera was new. Detective Flores, via phone interview with Arias, asked her if she knew a possible motive for why someone would want to damage Alexander's camera. Although images had been deleted, Mesa police were able to recover the photos. The recovered photos included Arias and Alexander, both in sexually suggestive poses, at approximately 1:40 p.m. on June 4, 2008. The last photo of Alexander alive and in the shower was taken at 5:29:20 p.m. on June 4th. Moments later, images appear of an individual, believed to be Alexander, profusely bleeding on the floor. A bloody palm print was located in the bathroom hallway, which DNA revealed to be a mixture of Arias and Alexander's DNA. Arias continued to insist that she had last seen Alexander in April 2008, despite being presented with DNA and photographic evidence by Detective Esteban Flores. Ryan Burns and others, who met Arias in Utah after the killing, indicated she had bandages on her hands, and she wore long sleeves on days when it was very hot. She told different stories about how she received the cuts to her hands. Burns was told they were from an injury while working at Margaritaville restaurant. At the trial, it was revealed by Siskiyou County, California, authorities that no such restaurant exists, nor ever existed in the area. At the time of the killing, she worked at Casa Ramos in Eureka. On June 5, 2008, West Jordan, Utah, police officer Michael Gallietti pulled Arias over while she was in the rented vehicle driving to a meeting with Burns. The car's front license plate was missing, and the rear plate was upside down. Arias attributed this to some kids at a Starbucks playing a trick on her. Burns helped Arias fix the license plate, and Gallietti did not cite her for the infraction. Arias was indicted by a grand jury on a first-degree murder charge on July 9, 2008, and arrested at her grandparents' home on July 15, 2008. She was extradited to Arizona on September 5, 2008, where she pled not guilty on September 11, 2008. Arias gave 3 different accounts of her whereabouts. She initially told police that she had not been in the home at the time of Alexander's death. She later told police that 2 intruders had broken into Alexander's house and that they murdered him and attacked her. Finally, she stated that she killed Alexander in self-defense and she was a victim of domestic violence. In March 2009, because of expressed concerns about possible violation of the victim's rights by holding ex parte mitigation status conferences, the appointed mitigation master was ordered to be relieved of further duties with limited exceptions. In May 2009, the court could not determine whether IQ testing and/or competency screening had been previously ordered, so Arias was ordered to submit to IQ testing and be tested for competence. In August 2009, Victoria Washington and Kirk Nurmi were appointed defense counsel, replacing Maria Schaffer. In September 2009, a defense motion to extend the last day beyond March 3, 2010 was denied. But in November 2009, another motion was granted after the state did not file a response, and the last day was set to August 31, 2010. In April 2010, a motion to disqualify the Maricopa County Attorney's Office was denied. In December 2010, after a rule of the Arizona Rules of Criminal Procedure was amended, changing the last day in capital cases from 18 to 24 months from arraignment, the state sought the death penalty. In January 2011, a defense filing detailed Arias' attorney's efforts to obtain text messages and emails. Initially, the prosecution told the defense attorneys that there were no available text messages sent or received by Alexander, and then was ordered to turn over several hundred. Mesa Police Detective Esteban Flores told defense attorneys that there was nothing out of the ordinary among Alexander's emails. About 8,000 were turned over to the defense in June 2010. In March 2011, the court ruled that the public defender's office did not have unilateral authority to dismantle the defense team. The trial commenced on December 10, 2012, in Maricopa County, Superior Court before Judge Sherry K. Stevens. During jury selection on December 20th, Arias' defense attorneys argued that the prosecution was systematically excluding women and African Americans. Prosecutor Juan Martinez said that race and sex were irrelevant to his decisions to strike certain jurors. Judge Stevens ruled that the prosecution had shown no bias in the jury selection. In opening arguments on January 2, 2013, Prosecutor Juan Martinez sought the death penalty. Arias was represented by appointed counsel L. Kirk Nurmi and Jennifer Wilmot, who argued that Alexander's death was a justifiable homicide committed in self-defense. A man testified that Arias visited him in Utah on June 5th and that she told him she had cut her hands on broken glass while working at a restaurant called Margaritaville. A detective testified no restaurant by that name had ever existed in the Eureka area. At the time, Arias was working at a restaurant called Casa Ramos. Later, Arias testified that after she cut her finger, "I had a bazillion margaritas to make." The prosecution argued that since a .25 caliber round was found near Alexander's body, and a week before a gun of the same caliber went missing during a burglary of the Eureka home where Arias lived with her grandparents, she had staged the burglary and used the weapon to kill Alexander. Arias took the stand in her defense on February 4, 2013, testifying for a total of 18 days. The sheer length of time Arias spent on the stand was described by criminal defense attorney Mark Garagos in a report compiled by the Associated Press CrimeCider staff as unprecedented. On the first day of her 18-day testimony, she told of being violently abused by her parents beginning when she was approximately 7 years old. Arias testified that she rented a car in Redding because a budget website gave her two options, one to the north and one to the south, and her brother lived in Redding. On her second day on the stand, Arias said that their sex life included oral sex and anal sex. She said the anal sex was painful for her the first time they experienced it together, and that while she considered oral sex and anal sex to be real, sex Alexander did not. He believed these forms of sexual activity, in contrast to vaginal sex, were technically not against Mormon rules. She said that they eventually had vaginal sex, but less often. A phone sex tape was played, in which Alexander said he wanted to zip-tie her to a tree while she was dressed as Little Red Riding Hood. She testified that Alexander secretly found young boys and girls sexually attractive, and she tried to help him with these urges. Arias testified that her relationship with Alexander became increasingly physically and emotionally abusive, some of which caused Travis's sister to roll her eyes and shake her head in disbelief continuously. Arias said that Alexander shook her while saying, "I'm fucking sick of you," then began screaming at me, after which he body slammed me on the floor at the foot of his bed and taunted her saying, "Don't act like that hurts," before he called her a bitch and kicked her in the ribs. Afterward, Arias said, "He went to kick me again, and I put my hand out." Arias held up her left hand in the courtroom, showing that her ring finger was crooked. According to Arias, the dysfunction of their relationship reached its climax when she killed Alexander in self-defense after he became enraged following a day of sex and a gun accident. forcing her to fight for her life. This was the third different account of how Alexander's death had occurred that Arias had offered police, which both prosecutors and observers felt severely damaged Arias's credibility as a witness, a sentiment later echoed by jurors upon the completion of the guilt phase. Arias addressed comments she made in a September 2008 television interview that had been played earlier in the trial. In the interview, she said, "No jury is going to convict me, because I am innocent. You can. Mark my words on that." Discussing the statement during her testimony, Arias said, "At the time of the interview, I had plans to commit suicide. So I was extremely confident that no jury would convict me because I didn't expect any of you to be here." At the close of his cross-examination of Arias, Martinez replayed the video and prompted Arias to affirm that she had said during the interview that she would not be convicted because she was innocent. At the end of the guilt phase, the jury's foreman, William Zervakos, expressed an opinion familiar to jury members and courtroom observers when he told ABC's Good Morning America that Arias's testimony didn't do her any good. "I think 18 days hurt her. I think she was not a good witness," he said. Starting March 14th, psychologist Richard Samuels testified for the defense for nearly 6 days. He said Arias was likely suffering from acute stress at the time of the killing, sending her body into a fight-or-flight mode to defend herself, which caused her brain to stop retaining memory. In response to a juror question asking whether this scenario could occur even if this were a premeditated murder, as the prosecution contended, he responded, "Is it possible? Yes. Is it probable? No." Samuels also diagnosed Arias with post-traumatic stress disorder. Prosecutor Juan Martinez attacked Samuels' credibility, accusing him of forming a biased relationship with Arias. Samuels had previously testified he had compassion for Arias. Beginning on March 26th, Alice Laviolette, a psychotherapist who specializes in domestic violence, testified that Arias was a victim of domestic abuse and that most victims don't tell anyone about the abuse because they feel ashamed. Laviolette summarized emails from Alexander's close friends. They have advised Ms. Arias to move on from the relationship, that Mr. Alexander has been abusive to women. The jury posed nearly 160 questions to Laviolette, many focusing on Arias' credibility. Clinical psychologist Janine DeMarti testified for the prosecution that Arias did not suffer from PTSD or amnesia, and that she found no evidence Alexander had abused Arias. Instead, DeMarte said Arias had borderline personality disorder, showing signs of immaturity and an unstable sense of identity. People who suffer from such a disorder have a terrified feeling of being abandoned by others, DeMarte told jurors. On April 24th, in response to previous testimony given by Arias about buying a 5-gallon gas can from a Walmart store in Salinas, California, on June 3, 2008, that she returned on the same day, the prosecution called Amanda Webb, a Walmart employee from the only Walmart in Salinas, to the stand. The employee said she had reviewed all of the records for that store for June 3, 2008, and found no return of a 5-gallon gas can. While there was a record of such a can being sold on that date, there was no record of any gas can returned subsequently for over a week, according to Ms. Webb. The final defense witness was psychologist Dr. Robert Geffner, who said that DeMarte's borderline diagnosis was not appropriate, and that all tests taken by Arias since her arrest pointed toward an anxiety disorder stemming from trauma. He also said the tests indicated that she answered questions honestly, without lying. Following Geffner's testimony, the state recalled Dr. Horn, who testified further on the gunshot wound, and called Dr. Jill Hayes, a forensic neuropsychologist, who disputed Geffner's testimony that the MMPI test was not geared toward diagnosing borderline personality disorder, concluding a long day in court at 8:29 p.m. In closing arguments on May 4th, Arias's defense argued that the premeditation theory didn't make sense. What happened in that moment in time? The relationship of chaos, ended in chaos as well. There is nothing about what happened on June 4th in that bathroom that looks planned. Couldn't it also be that after everything they went through in that relationship, she simply snapped? Ultimately, if Miss Arias is guilty of any crime at all, it is the crime of manslaughter and nothing more. In rebuttal, Prosecutor Martinez described the extent and variety of Alexander's wounds. There is no evidence that he ever laid a hand on her. Nothing indicates that this is anything less than a slaughter. There was no way to appease this woman who just wouldn't leave him alone, he said. Arias' 18-day testimony added to a very long defense portion of the guilt phase of the trial, which led to problems with jury retention. On April 3rd, a member of the jury was dismissed for misconduct. The defense team asked for a mistrial, which the judge denied. On April 12th, another juror was excused for health reasons. A third juror was dismissed on April 25th after being arrested for a DUI offense. On May 8, 2013, after 15 hours of deliberation, Arias was found guilty of first-degree murder. Out of 12 jurors, 5 jurors found her guilty of first-degree premeditated murder, and 7 jurors found her guilty of both first-degree premeditated murder and felony murder. As the guilty verdict was read, Arias struggled to repress tears as Alexander's family smiled and hugged each other. Several people gathered outside the courtroom and began celebrating by cheering and chanting. Following the first-degree murder conviction, the prosecution was required to convince the jury that the murder was cruel, heinous, or depraved for them to determine that Arias was eligible for the death penalty. The aggravation phase of the trial started on May 15, 2013. The only witness was the medical examiner who performed the autopsy. Arias's attorneys, who had repeatedly asked to step down from the case, gave only brief opening statements and closing arguments, in which they said the adrenaline rushing through Alexander's body may have prevented him from feeling much pain during his death. Prosecutor Martinez showed photos of the corpse and crime scene to the jury, then paused for 2 minutes of silence to illustrate how long he said it took for Alexander to die at Arias's hands. After less than 3 hours of consideration, the jury determined that Arias was eligible for the death penalty. The penalty phase began on May 16, 2013, when prosecutors called Alexander's family members to offer victim impact statements to convince the jury that Arias's crime merited a death sentence. On May 21, 2013, Arias offered an allocution, during which she pleaded for a life sentence. Arias acknowledged that her plea for life was a reversal of remarks she made to a TV reporter shortly after her conviction, when she said she preferred the death penalty. "Each time I said that I meant it, but I lacked perspective," the former waitress said. "Until very recently, I could not imagine standing before you and asking you to give me life." She said she changed her mind to avoid bringing more pain to members of her family who were in the courtroom. At one point, she held up a white T-shirt with the word "Survivor" written across it, telling the jurors that she would sell the clothing and donate all proceeds to victims of domestic abuse. She also said she would donate her hair to Locks of Love while in prison and had already done so thrice. That evening, in a joint jailhouse interview with the Arizona Republic, 12 News and NBC's Today Show, Arias said she didn't know whether the jury would come back with life or death. "Whatever they come back with, I will have to deal with it. I have no other choice." Regarding the verdict, she said, "It felt like a huge sense of unreality. I felt betrayed by the jury. I was hoping they would see things for what they are. I felt awful for my family and what they were thinking." On May 23, 2013, the sentencing phase of Arias's trial resulted in a hung jury, prompting the judge to declare a mistrial for that phase. CNN reported the vote was 8-4 in favor of death. After the mistrial was declared and the jury discharged, the jury foreman stated that he believed Arias was mentally abused, but that had not been enough to excuse her crime. He also said, I think 18 days hurt her. She was not a good witness. We're charged with presuming innocence, right? But she was on the stand for so long, there were so many contradicting stories. He said the jury found the responsibility of weighing the death sentence overwhelming but were horrified when their efforts ended in a mistrial. By the end, we were mentally and emotionally exhausted, he said. We were horrified when we found out they had called a mistrial, and we felt we had failed. On May 30th, 2013, Maricopa County Attorney Bill Montgomery discussed the next steps at a news conference. He said he was confident an impartial jury could be seated, but it was possible that lawyers and the victim's family could agree to scrap the trial in favor of a life sentence with no parole. Arias had said, "I don't think there is an untainted jury pool anywhere in the world right now. That's what it feels like. But I still believe in the system to a degree, so we'll go through that if that happens." Defense attorneys responded, "If the diagnosis made by the state's psychologist is correct, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office is seeking to impose the death penalty upon a mentally ill woman who has no prior criminal history. It is not incumbent upon Ms. Arias' defense counsel to resolve this case." As of April 25, 2013, defense costs had reached almost $1.7 million paid by taxpayers. The penalty phase of the trial is ongoing. A tweet on Arias' behalf indicated she may be considering a plea deal. On October 22, 2013, Arias filed a motion requesting that Nurmi be replaced as her lead counsel. On October 24, 2013, Arias met with the prosecution to discuss a settlement. During the trial, defense attorneys filed for mistrial in January, April, and May 2013. Arias' lawyers argued in January that Detective Esteban Flores, the lead Mesa police detective on the case, perjured himself during a 2009 pretrial hearing aimed at determining whether the death penalty should be considered an option for jurors. Flores testified at the 2009 hearing that based on his review of the scene and a discussion with the medical examiner, it was apparent that Alexander had been shot in the forehead first. Contrary to Flores' testimony at the 2009 hearing, the medical examiner told jurors the gunshot probably would have incapacitated Alexander. Given his extensive defense wounds, including stab marks and slashes to his hands, arms, and legs, it was not likely the shot came first. During his trial testimony, Flores denied perjury and said he misunderstood what the medical examiner told him. In April, the defense claimed the prosecutor had misbehaved and said the case resembled a modern-day equivalent to the Salem witch trials. In the motion, the defense team contended, "The prosecutorial misconduct has infested these proceedings with a level of unfairness that cannot be cured by any other means." The motion also stated a circus-like atmosphere inside the courtroom, and prosecutor Juan Martinez had yelled at witnesses, attacked witnesses on a personal level, and thrown evidence. The motion also alleged that Martinez chose to release evidence and pose for pictures with his fans on the courthouse steps. The attorneys claimed Arias was in a position where she could not present a complete defense, and the only constitutional course was to declare a mistrial. On May 20, 2013, defense attorneys again filed for mistrial. The motion alleged that a defense witness who had been due to testify Friday began receiving threats. These threats included threats on her life if she were to testify on Ms. Arias' behalf, and on May 19, 2013, the witness contacted counsel for Ms. Arias, stating that she was no longer willing to testify due to these threats. The motion continued. It should also be noted that these threats follow those made to Alice La Violette, a record of which was made ex parte and under seal. The motion was denied, as was a motion for a stay in the proceedings that had been sought to give time to appeal the decisions to the Arizona Supreme Court. On May 29, 2013, the Arizona Supreme Court declined to hear an appeal filed 3 months earlier, which the mid-level Arizona Court of Appeals also refused. Nurmi had asked the High Court to throw out the aggravating factor of cruelty because the judge had allowed it to go forward based on a different theory of how the murder occurred. The state had initially claimed that Arias first shot Alexander. Based on that theory, Stevens ruled there was probable cause to find the crime had been committed ruthlessly, an aggravating factor under state law. Right before the trial, prosecutor Martinez revealed his new theory that Arias had shot Alexander after he was already dead. The case featured on an episode of 48 Hours Mystery, Picture Perfect in 2008, an interview that, for the first time in the show's history, was used as evidence in a death penalty trial. On September 24, 2008, Inside Edition interviewed Arias at the Maricopa County Jail, where she stated, "No jury is going to convict me, because I am innocent, and you can mark my words on that. No jury is going to convict me." The Huffington Post reported that the Arias case instantly commanded headlines worldwide. The Associated Press said the case was a circus, a runaway train, and said the case grew into a worldwide sensation as thousands followed the trial via a live, unedited web feed. They added that the trial garnered daily coverage from cable news networks and spawned a virtual cottage industry for talk shows. And, at the courthouse, the entire case devolved into a circus-like spectacle attracting dozens of enthusiasts each day to the courthouse as they lined up for a chance to score just a few open public seats in the gallery. For its fans, the Arias trial became a live daytime soap opera. The Toronto Star stated, "With its mix of jealousy, religion, murder, and sex, the Jodi Arias case shows what happens when the justice system becomes entertainment." During the trial, public figures freely expressed their opinions. Jodi Arias has stated that she follows me on Twitter, so I hate to be saying that she is guilty, but sadly, she is as guilty as it gets, Donald Trump wrote. He also offered Arias legal advice on avoiding the maximum sentence. Jodi should try, but the government should not make a deal. No jury could be dumb enough to let her off, but you never know. Look at OJ and others, Trump suggested. Arizona Governor Jan Brewer told reporters after an unrelated press event that she believed Arias guilty. She sidestepped a question about whether she believed the one-time waitress guilty of manslaughter, second-degree murder, or first-degree murder, but said, "I don't have all the information, but I think she's guilty." HLN staff and their commentators compared the case to the Casey Anthony case for the perceived similarities between Anthony and Arias and the emotions the cases incited in the general public. HLN aired a daily show covering the trial called HLN After Dark, the Jodi Arias trial. The cable network sent a press release titled HLN #1 among ad-supported cable as Arias pleads for her life, bragging that they led in the ratings. The release stated, HLN continues to be the ratings leader and complete source for coverage of the Jodi Arias trial. Dirty Little Secret is a made-for-television movie starring lost actress Tanya Raymond as Arias and Jesse Lee Soffer of the Iditarod mob doctor as Travis Alexander. Tony Plana, the actor from Ugly Betty, played prosecutor Juan Martinez, and David Zayas of Dexter portrays Detective Esteban Flores. The film premiered on June 22, 2013. It was created for and distributed by the Lifetime Network and premiered on June 22, 2013. In late January 2013, artwork drawn by Arias began selling on eBay. The seller was her brother. He claimed that the profits went towards covering the family's travel expenses to the trial and better food for Arias while she was in jail. On April 11th, USA Today reported that during the testimony of defense witness Alice LaViolette, tweets and other social media posts attacked her reputation. You can show your disgust with LaViolette. They posted her office phone number and her website, and they suggested that people write negative reviews of her best-selling book on Amazon.com. More than 500 of them were panning the book and calling LaViolette a fraud and a disgrace. It's the electronic version of a lynch mob, said retired Maricopa County Superior Court Judge Kenneth Fields. Attorney Ann Bremner who said she received death threats after she provided legal counsel in the Amanda Knox case, told the Huffington Post that the kind of online ridicule LaViolette received could affect attorneys and witnesses in high-profile trials. "It's something to take into account," Bremner said. "If I had kids, I would consider it even more so." On May 9th, The Republic commented, "The Jodi Arias trial has been a social media magnet, and when Arias was convicted Wednesday of first degree, murder, Twitter, and Facebook exploded with reaction. Much of it was aimed at Arias, though plenty of people tweeted at the media coverage, such as the antics of HLN host Nancy Grace. During the trial, hardcore followers of the proceedings were accused of trying to use social media to intimidate witnesses or otherwise influence the outcome. Whether it had any effect is questionable, but it's a notable development." On May 24th, Victoria Washington, one of Arias' attorneys until she had to resign in 2011 because of a conflict, said, "Arias' lead attorney, Nurmi, was pilloried in social media. At one point, an internet denizen photoshopped his face onto a crime scene. Photo of Alexander dead in the shower of his Mesa home. I know people were aggravated with him constantly filing for a mistrial, but you must make and preserve the record for federal review, on appeal. If you don't file for a mistrial, the appeals courts will say you waived it." On May 28th, Radar Online reported the jury foreman had been receiving threats ever since the panel deadlocked on the sentencing phase, and now his son was claiming he was receiving death threats. "Today, I read the hate mail my dad got. Some person had sent him a threatening message complete with his email address, full name, and phone number, which at the very least means that this guy should retake Hate Mail 101. I also read some comments on an article online about my dad. Surreal. They say the defendant fooled my dad, that he was taken with her, that he hated the prosecutor," his son wrote on his public blog. Arias friends operate the Twitter account in Arias' name on her behalf. On June 22nd, from that account Arias tweeted, "Just don't know yet if I will plea or appeal." After months of twists and turns in a dramatic trial rife with sex, lies, and digital images, an Arizona jury Wednesday found Jodi Arias guilty of first-degree murder in the slaying of ex-boyfriend Travis Alexander. Jurors will return to court Thursday for the aggravation phase of the trial, an essential step in the next key decision they face, determining whether Arias lives or dies. Now, the odds, I think, shift somewhat in her favor because it's a very different thing to sentence someone to die than to convict them, CNN senior legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin said. In a television interview minutes after the verdict was announced, Arias said she'd prefer a death sentence. "I said years ago that I'd rather get death than life, and that still is true today," she told Phoenix television station KSAZ. "I believe death is the ultimate freedom, so I'd rather just have my freedom, as soon as I can get it." The comments prompted authorities to place Arias on suicide watch in an Arizona jail, according to the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. Until she is released from suicide protocol by sheriff's officials, no further media interviews of inmate Arias will be permitted, the office said in a statement. Arias was stoic in court Wednesday. Her eyes briefly welled up with tears as a clerk announced that the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder for killing Alexander in June 2008. Alexander's sisters cried and consoled each other after the verdict was read in the packed courtroom. Crowds outside the courthouse erupted in cheers as news of the jury's decision spread. Several of Alexander's friends told HLN they were relieved. "It just feels so good to finally have the truth and be vindicated," said Dave Hall, choking back tears. "But that relief isn't enough," Elisha Schabel said. "It's not going to bring Travis back. He was such a light to this world," she said. "And it's important that we forgive Jodi, so she doesn't have the power to destroy our lives." Another friend, Clancy Talbot, said she was grateful for the verdict. Looking at Jodi's face, "I think this is probably the first time in her life she has ever been held responsible for what she's done. Ever. And I think she's in shock," she said. We have waited 5 years through the circus that Jodi has created. But the trial isn't over yet, and Arias, who testified for 18 days during the trial, could speak to jurors again in court. In the next step of the case, known as the aggravation phase, prosecutors will have a chance to present additional evidence, and jurors will decide whether Alexander's death was caused cruelly. If they decide that was the case, the trial would move to the penalty phase, where jurors would decide whether Arias should receive a death sentence. If the jury decides on a death sentence, the judge is bound by that decision. But if the jury decides against the death penalty, the judge would have 2 options: sentencing Arias to life in prison without the possibility of parole, or sentencing her to life in prison with the possibility of parole after at least 25 years. There are currently 127 people on death row in Arizona. If Arias is given a sentence of death, she would be the 4th woman on death row in the state. As jurors prepare for the sentencing phase of the criminal trial, family members of Alexander are preparing to file a civil wrongful death lawsuit, attorney Jay Beckstead told reporters outside the courthouse. Alexander's siblings won't speak publicly about the case until Arias is sentenced, Beckstead said, adding that the family is grateful to prosecutors and detectives for their work. Since Friday, jurors had been deliberating evidence surrounding a key question: did Arias kill ex-boyfriend Travis Alexander in self-defense, or did she commit murder? Alexander was stabbed repeatedly, shot, and nearly decapitated 5 years ago. Arias says she killed him in self-defense after he attacked her, but the grisly slaying caused even some anti-domestic violence advocates to doubt her case. The jury has been in court since January 2nd and heard closing arguments on Friday. Jurors deliberated for 15 hours and 5 minutes. As they took a lunch break after revealing they had reached a verdict Wednesday, some jurors were seen smiling and breathing sighs of relief. One juror, returning from lunch, wiped her eyes. A massive crowd swarmed around the Maricopa County Courthouse Wednesday afternoon. Some onlookers said they had been following the trial for months. The case has drawn worldwide attention, and followers line up daily for courtroom seats. "We are here every day to support Travis' family 100%, said Kathy Brown, who got a cane she used, which prosecutor Juan Martinez autographed, and she cried outside the courthouse after the verdict was announced. Wednesday, "I am so thankful," she said. "I knew the Lord would do the right thing." In the trial, both sides dramatically presented their arguments with details about Arias' love affair with Alexander. She rewarded that love from Travis Alexander by sticking a knife in his chest, Martinez said in his opening statement. And, "You know he was a good man, according to her, and about being a good man, well, she slit his throat as a reward for being a good man. And in terms of these blessings, well, she knocked the blessings out of him by putting a bullet in his head." But defense attorney Jennifer Wilmot countered, "Jodi Arias killed Travis Alexander. There's no question about it. The million-dollar question is, what would have forced her to do it?" Wilmot said Arias was the victim of a controlling, psychologically abusive relationship, and Alexander considered Arias his dirty little secret. Martinez accused Arias of playing the victim. He alleged she staged the crime scene to make it look like self-defense. He also accused her of actively seeking to profit from her media attention. Alexander's family hopes to stop that with its civil lawsuit, Beckstead said Wednesday. The law in Arizona states that people should not be benefiting from their wrongdoing in a criminal case, and my law firm is going to do the best it can to make sure that she does not benefit from her wrongdoing or her notoriety, he said. In her interview with KSAZ Wednesday, Arias said she was surprised by the jury's verdict. "It was unexpected for me, yes, because there was no premeditation on my part," she said. "I can see how things look that way." Arias told KSAZ that longevity runs in her family and that the worst possible outcome in the case would be a life sentence without parole. "I would much rather die sooner than later," she said. Several members of the Arias family were at the jail where Arias was being held Wednesday night, waiting to meet with her. Mother Sandra. Arias said she had heard about her daughter's post-verdict TV interview but hadn't watched it. She appeared to be very emotional and concerned about her daughter. Sandra Arias said her daughter can do a lot of good for others while serving time,